Hello, and welcome back to the studio. I'm Dr. Wigo, and today we're going to be talking about games. PS5 games, particularly Trails into Reverie, a new game from Nihon, well, actually now they're just called Falcom. They used to be called Nihon Falcom. It's a long story. Before I get to my long story, let me just start with telling you, if you have not played Trails of Cold Steel, then you do not want to buy this game because you will have no idea what's going on. This is the 5th game in a sequence. Trails of Cold Steel spanned 4 games. And so if you don't know what's going on, this is kind of the coda, the bow they're tying on the end of that. If you haven't played the other 4, or at least the last two, at least 3 and 4, although ideally you'd play all of them, just move along. Or go get those games. And by the way, they're tons of fun. I'll talk about all of the games in the whole series momentarily. In fact, let me help you out and get through the video. If you don't know anything about it, you might want to sit through a bunch of it. Or, first I'm going to talk about the original 5 games in the series, which really have nothing to do with the current games. So that'll be the next chapter. But you may want to skip that chapter and skip on to the next chapter where we'll get into the sequence that starts kind of the Zemuria Saga, which so far spans 10 games. And according to the creators, the 11th game has come out and 12th games have come out in Japan. They haven't been translated in English yet. But the 11th game is considered the halfway point. So there's going to, there've been 10 in English, and there's going to be 10 more. Yeah, it's a sweeping saga. And each of the games is huge. Lots of characters. Almost every non-playable character has a name and story arcs. So every time you go through town, if you talk to them, they'll say something different and things will happen. And they're just amazing. Well, let me start with the original 5 games, which I've never played. I've never even seen. I will go scrounge the internet and find pictures or screen captures or something so you can at least see kind of what they looked like. But the original game came out in 1989 in Japan only for the NEC PC 8801. I had to go look that up. And then of course it later was moved to other PCs, Japanese PCs of the late 80s and early 90s. Then a sequel to that game called Dragonslayer: The Legend of Heroes 2 came out in 1992. Again, for the NEC PC 8801, whatever that is, and other PCs. Then, in 1994, The Legend of Heroes: Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch. Now, the Dragonslayer, 2 Dragonslayer games were related, so those were like one story. Well, split into 2. Then they went on and did a little trilogy, and the first one of those was The Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, which came out for the NEC PC 9801, and then later was also ported to the Sega Saturn, the PlayStation, Windows, and in 2006, it came to the PSP in English. So that was the first Legend of Heroes game released in English. Then in 1996, The Legend of Heroes: A Tear of Vermilion, which was a sequel or prequel. Again, I don't know these games. This was for the NEC PC 9801, and then the PlayStation a couple years later, Windows a couple years after that, and again, 2005, they did a PSP remake in English. Wait, the PSP remake in English of this game was in 2005. So the previous game, The Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, well, that came out in English the year after that. So in America, it was titled The Legend of Heroes 2, even though it was technically the 3rd game. Then 1999, The Legend of Heroes 3, again, mainly for America. Song of the Ocean came out for Windows with a PSP remake in 2006. I don't know anything about those games. I don't recommend any of those games. But let me get into the games I will recommend, which are the Trails games. So starting in 2004, now this is the 6th game overall in the series, but it's the first game in what I think of as the Zemuria Saga. Zemuria is a continent on another planet somewhere. Trails in the Sky came out for Windows in Japan. And then they did a PSP remake in 2006. It came out in English on the PSP in 2011, so 7 years later. And then they did Japanese only versions in 2012 and 2015 for the PS3 and the PlayStation Vita. Currently, you can get it in English on Windows, Steam. It has 8 playable characters. It's the simplest of the games. I'll have some pictures playing so you can see what it looks like. You can see it's not high resolution. It's very simplistic animations, and they do kind of the visual novel thing. It can be a little hard, off-putting at first because it's kind of old school. But again, if you play it on Windows, it's fun. But again, don't need to play this game. But it's fun. It follows this young new bracer called Estelle Bright and her adventures in a country called Liberl. And this starts a whole lot of traditions with this game. For one thing, they have what they call combat orbments, which are basically crystals that give them magic, let them perform magic and do all sorts of things. So you have to collect these orbments. You have to try to, and there's a perfect way to place them. And so it's quite the challenge. Also, this game introduces one of the first mini games, fishing. As we go through the series, there will be more and more mini games. And yes, you have to finish most of the mini games to get the platinum trophy, which I find annoying because I don't like some of the mini games. Persona was the same way. The Japanese like that stuff. It was quite a great, grand story. And the thing to start with this game that continues through all of these games is that you have to go around and look everywhere and talk to everyone. Now, this is a common Japanese role-playing game thing anyway. But in the Trails games, the NPCs that you talk to, they have their own little stories. And as you talk to them throughout the game, things will change, and sometimes it will affect the outcome of the game. And there will be hidden side quests that you won't even know about unless you talk to some of these people. It's maddening. And by the way, the reason it takes so long for the English versions to come out is the games are massive with lots of dialogue. So just to translate the dialogue, not even counting voice acting, just to translate the dialogue, and these early ones, I don't think they don't have English voice actors. The voice acting is all Japanese, and it's not even all. One of the games, I think it was the Trails in the Sky the Third. It's so long. How long is it? It's longer than The Lord of the Rings when you write it all out. And I mentioned there were 8 playable characters. People come and join your party and leave. It's like a lot of Japanese role-playing games. And there's crafting where you can upgrade things and you get armors and you buy things. It's a classic Japanese role-playing game. In 2006, out came The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky SC for second chapter. Again, originally came out for Windows in Japan, and then the PSP a year later. The English version, 2015, so 9 years later. And again, you can currently get it on Steam if you want to play it. Again, I'll show you some of the gameplay, and you'll think, well, maybe I don't want to play that. It's still a fantastic story. Now, this one, we bump it up to 13 playable characters, so you have the party's makeup changes more frequently. Then 2007, the Trails in the Sky set comes to an end with Trails in the Sky the Third, which came out for Windows and the PSP, and the English version 10 years later in 2017. And you can currently play it on Windows, on Steam. This one had 23 playable characters. The design of the game was there was a lot more. There were like doors that you had to go through. It wasn't like a linear game with a linear story. Well, guess what? Neither is Trails into Reverie. So they've kind of gone back. So this was kind of like the coda to the Trails in the Sky games. Well, Trails into Reverie is the coda to the Trails of Cold Steel games. But we don't get to Trails of Cold Steel just yet. In 2010, they brought out a game called Trails from Zero. For the PSP, an English version came out 12 years later, in 2022, just recently, for the Switch, for PS4, and for Windows. This one has 13 playable characters. Now, by the way, this is on the same continent of Zemuria, but it's not in Liberl, which is at one end of the continent. It's in a city-state called Crossbell at the other end of the continent. Crossbell figures heavily in Trails into Reverie. So again, now you don't have to play these games to understand Trails into Reverie because, well, for reasons I will explain shortly, because some of these games are going to overlap. Trails from Zero takes place shortly after the Trails in the Sky games. Then in 2011, the sequel to that game, Trails to Azure, came out for the PSP. The English version came out this year for the Switch, for the PS4, and for Windows. This one has 16 playable characters. Now, these English versions for the Switch and the PS4 and Windows, much higher quality. They're still, well, here, you'll be looking while I'm talking. You'll see that, yeah, it's still the simplistic animation and the visual novel kind of stuff. And the orbits are getting more complicated. And the battle systems, they keep adding things to the battle systems. They're really cool games. They will explain a lot in Trails into Reverie, but you don't need to play them. What you need to start with for Trails into Reverie are the Trails of Cold Steel series, which started in 2013 with Trails of Cold Steel, which came out for the PS3 and Vita. The English version only 2 years later in 2015. The Windows version in 2017, PS4 version in 2019, and the Nintendo Switch version in 2021. This one features 22 playable characters. Now, Trails of Cold Steel introduces for the first time into this saga school. If you've played Japanese role-playing games, you know they love schools. They love games that take place in schools. So there's a school thing, and you have to take tests, and then you have to go to class. They love little school simulations in the middle of the fighting and all that. Well, Trails of Cold Steel is set in a school, a military academy, so lots of fighting, but still it's a school. So they get their school stuff in, and again, the mini games are getting more complicated. Oh, plus, and here's the big thing, this went to 3D models. So much higher quality. It looks more like a modern game, whereas like in the older ones, which again is why you might not want to play those. But you can play these. These are pretty good. 22 playable characters, because you have a lot of students. Because you're following Reen Schwarzer. At the beginning of the game, it's his first day of school at the military academy. So you're following his thing for the next 5 games. But there's lots of schoolmates and other people, so there's a lot of playable characters. And the ante keeps getting up. And then in 2014, Trails of Cold Steel 2 comes out for the PS3 and Vita. The English version, again, just 2 years later in 2016. Windows version in 2018. PS4 version in 2019. Switch version in 2021. 23 playable characters. You only picked up 1. Trails of Cold Steel 1 kind of ends on a cliffhanger. And so you got to get Trails of Cold Steel 2 because you got to know what happened. Trails of Cold Steel 2 doesn't end on quite the cliffhanger, but it kind of wraps up a story. But it's clear there's a bigger story that we were just starting to get into. I forgot to tell you. We're now in a country called Erebonia, the Empire of Erebonia, which, by the way, Liberal's at one end of and Crossbell's at the other end of. And while these things are going on, those Crossbell games are happening simultaneously. So there's a scene towards the end of Cold Steel 2 where they're looking out a window at Crossbell way in the distance, and they can see this weird thing going on, and they don't know what it is. I think it's the Azure tree, somebody says. Trails to Azure? Huh? Yeah, that's what's going on. That game is going on simultaneously with these games. They both finish, and now we move to Trails of Cold Steel 3, which came out in 2017 in Japan on the PS4. The English version followed a couple of years later in 2019, and then the Windows and Nintendo Switch versions in 2020, and it even came out for Google Stadia in 2021. And we bumped up another notch to 27 playable characters. By the way, the animations have gotten better. Well, while I'm talking, hopefully you're seeing all this happening. Depends on how good an editor I am. Yeah, we don't know. Then in 2018, Trails of Cold Steel 4 comes out. By the way, these are all really long games. I mean, you're talking like 80 to 100 hours of gameplay, easy. And again, and like all these games, you have to go back and talk to people, and there's hidden side quests, and sometimes the hidden side quest is in the area you just left, so you have to turn around and go the wrong way, go back the way you came to find the hidden side quest. There are guides. Just Google guides on the internet for these games, and they'll tell you where all the hidden side quests are hidden. By the way, and starting with Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4, they started marking these hidden side. They're not so hidden anymore because there'll be little markers, but you have to go look for them. Well, Trails of Cold Steel 4 is just a massive finale. Guess who shows up in Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4? Estelle Bright, Joshua Bright, Cassius Bright, the people from the original Trails in the Sky games. Oh, and Lloyd Bannings from Crossbell, who's the lead character of that arc. He shows up with his people, and they all come back together for a massive finale. 39 playable characters. Trails of Cold Steel 4 is an amazing game. It was one of my favorite games I have ever played. I know I told you about the Tales from Neptunia series, which was what introduced me to JRPGs. Well, this is what made me just fall head over heels in love with JRPGs, because these games are massive in scale and scope, and there's so much to do. I've played through them all at least 5 times. That reminds me, the new Final Fantasy game just came out. I was telling my nephew, he said, "What's it like?" I said, "Well, it's a bunch of fighting and then long cutscenes." He said, "Oh, it's a Final Fantasy game." Yeah, well, these are like that too. There's a lot of fighting and then there'll be long cutscenes. Well, subsequent playthroughs, you can skip the cutscenes so you can get through them a lot faster. That brings us to this game, but I'm not going to talk about it just yet. Trails into Reverie came out in 2020 in Japan for the PS4, and then the PS5 version came out in Japan in 2023, but the English version came out here for PS4 and PS5, and Windows and Nintendo Switch versions. We'll come back and talk about that one, because I need to talk about games 16 and 17. Trails into Reverie may be the bow tied on the end of Trails of Cold Steel, but now there's 2 new games that have already been out in Japan. The Legend of Heroes Kuro no Kiseki and The Legend of Heroes Kuro no Kiseki 2 Crimson Sin. I don't know what no Kiseki means, but I do know that, like the Japanese version of Trails of Cold Steel, it was Sen no Kiseki. These are in the same thing. In fact, the Trails of Cold Steel especially, and the Crossbell games too, there's another country on the other side of Crossbell from Erebonia called Calvard. It's kind of more Eastern themed, and it's more like Asian influenced. They get kind of warlike, and part of Trails of Cold Steel, there's warlike things going on between Erebonia and Calvard. Well, Kuro no Kiseki is the Calvard arc. Falcom has said that this 16th game of the overall series, the 11th game of the no Kiseki series, is the halfway point. There's already 2 out. There's going to be 8 more after that. And for those of us who speak English, we got 10 more because these have not been translated yet. Again, they're massive games, lots to translate. And they've been doing, especially in the Trails of Cold Steel, and Trails into Reverie is heavily voiced. A lot of cutscenes with voices that are voice acted. And the voice acting is pretty good. And in fact, they've been the same voice actors going back all 5 games. So the guy that plays Reen Schwarzer is still playing Reen Schwarzer 5 games later. Oh, and unlike a lot of Japanese role-playing games, the English voice actors are credited in the end credits. So that's got us through all 17 of the games that are out so far in Japan. Let's talk about Trails into Reverie. If you like Trails of Cold Steel, especially if you like Trails of Cold Steel 4, you're going to love Trails into Reverie. It kind of picks up right after that game ends, shortly after that game has ended, maybe a few months later. You got a lot of the same characters coming back. You got Lloyd Bannings and the Crossbell crew coming back. You've got Reen Schwarzer and his students. Oh, and I didn't even cover in my wrap-up. Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, Reen Schwarzer is a student. Well, he graduates, and so Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4, he's an instructor, and he has his own students, which introduces additional characters. Oh, but he still keeps in touch with his classmates from when he was in school. So that's how you end up with over 50 playable characters in Trails into Reverie. It's just huge. And they put in some new stuff. They've got a thing now called United Front. In most of the games, they have like break status, which is very common in Japanese role-playing games, where if you break someone, well, then you can maybe get a second hit in, and they have bursts. And well, now they have one called United Front, where it's not just everybody, all the characters on the field, because you can only have 4 characters up at a time in the turn-based battle system. But in a United Front, your reserve characters on the back row, they all come charging in too, and so you can really beat some people down. Now, you can't do it that often because you have to build up that. You know, it's a great mechanic. It's made me very happy. It's a good quality of life thing, especially for mobs. You can just like wipe them out and then get to the next long cutscenes. But that's not the only thing they changed. They introduced the route system. You follow Lloyd Bannings and Reen Schwarzer and a new character who we don't know who he is. He's question mark, question mark, question mark. And they each have their own routes. Well, you know they're going to converge, and they do. And the way they converge, if you played Trails of Cold Steel 2, there was a thing called the Reverie Corridor, which was like a post-game dungeon where you could, beef up and get ready to go back and play New Game Plus much stronger so you could play on the much harder difficulties. Well, there's a Reverie Corridor here, but it's introduced earlier in the game. It's it is a post-game thing, but it's not just a post-game thing. So you can actually run into the Reverie Corridor and like if you're having trouble with a boss, you can run into the Reverie Corridor and level your guys up, running around, and then come back out and beat the boss. So it's a fascinating thing. And of course, there's all sorts of goodies. Oh, in the Reverie Corridor, there are memories, daydreams that you can unlock. Well, as you're playing the main game, they start talking about something that happened that everybody clearly knows about, but you have no idea what they're talking about. Well, later on in the Reverie Corridor, if you play your cards right, you'll find the daydream with that story. And then when you play through it the second time and you get to that part, you'll go, oh, I know exactly what they're talking about because I saw that story. And in these daydreams, by the way, there are fights. And I mean, they're like it's like they took all the things that they thought people wanted to see and they made little stories, sub-stories out of them. So it just makes it an even more sprawling thing. It's just amazing. The characters are amazing. There's new characters that are introduced in this, in the question mark route, who we've never seen before. Oh, here's a hot tip. When you start the game for the first time, there's a thing down on the main screen, new game, load game, new game, whatever. There's a thing called backstory. If you go into backstory, it'll actually tell you the stories, give you like a summary of the Crossbell games and Trails of Cold Steel. But there's one down there called 3 and 9, which is a story about these characters you've never heard of before. Well, I advise you to read that story before you start the game. I think you kind of know where this is going. You're going to meet those characters. And you're not going to know anything about them. I didn't read that story before I started the first time. So I get these, I'm going, who are these people? They're awesome characters. I loved them. But I had no idea who they were or where they came from. But you read that story. By the way, all of these games, when they're doing the translations, in addition to translating all the dialogue, there are books. There are dozens, and over the series of games, hundreds of books where they lay out the histories and historical development. It's kind of like Game of Thrones kind of stuff, where there's all this backstory that's in these books. So whenever you're in a library, if there's a little thing on a bookcase, you go over and click it, and sometimes there'll be like 10 books. And there's newspapers that you run when you're running around going into towns and everything. Always check the shop to see if they have the latest newspaper, and you can find out things that are going on elsewhere on the continent. I can't tell you how much I love this game. It came out like 2 weeks ago. I've already played through it twice. I'm on my third playthrough. I almost could have gotten the platinum in 2 playthroughs, the platinum trophy, but I missed scanning one enemy. Fortunately, it was early in the game, so now I'm having to go through a third time to pick up that one enemy I missed, which I got from reading a guide, so I highly recommend reading the guides. And there's cooking, and by the way, of course, things you cook can make you better. That's common in a lot of Japanese games. The fishing, there's a card game. Actually, there's 2 card games. In Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, there's a simplistic card game. And in 3 and 4 and Trails of Reverie, there's a much more complicated card game, which is actually quite fun. I actually enjoy that one. And then there's a pom-pom party game, which I just hate. And you have to beat it to get the platinum. But it's like Tetris, except against an opponent, and you can mess with each other's boards. Yeah, I don't like it, but I'll get there. Oh, and in the Reverie Quarter, they also introduce a bunch of new mini games that have never been there before, and you get rewards for playing those. And so there's tons of content. It's like, let's make a big present for all the people who played through all of these 10 games. All these 9 games to get to this point. Let's give them a thing where they can basically play almost any character that was ever in any of the games. Well, you can put them in your party and go do stuff, especially in the Reverie Quarter, because in the Reverie Quarter, you can play with all the characters. Am I convincing you how much I love this game? I love this game. These are my favorite games of all time. I'm so excited that I know there's 2 more that are already in the can, already been done. And in fact, in the Reverie Quarter, come with some of those daydreams are daydreams of those games. So they're kind of giving you a preview of some of the things that could happen. It's mind-boggling how broad in scope. I mean, it covers a continent and multiple countries. And Calvert is a country we've never been to before. Well, actually, okay, I lie. The opening scene of Trails to Zero, Lloyd Bannings is arriving into Crossbell on a train from Calvert. So we have actually physically been in Calvert briefly. Where was I? I get so caught up. I love this game so much. And I hope my descriptions have done it some kind of justice. Yeah, the United Front system is kind of amazing. This is just one of the most fantastic games I've ever played. Again, it would not be nearly in fact, it probably wouldn't be any fun at all if I hadn't played Trails from Cold Steel all 4 games. Because that's where I got to know all these characters and love all these characters. And now this is like a big present to let me play with them one last time before we move into the Calvert arc, which is going to be a whole different set of characters. Although knowing these guys, our guys are going to show up briefly here and there. In fact, I think in Trails into Reverie, there's a couple of people who drop some hints about going to Calvert. And in the Crossbell arc, one of the characters is from Calvert, one of the main characters. So I'm pretty sure she'll show up over there. I mean, I don't know, but I can guess. That's the Trails series and the Trails into Reverie game. I give Trails into Reverie, I give it 10 stars. I give it my highest rating. It's just, I love these games, and this is the best one of them yet. But again, it's only the best because I played the others. If I hadn't played the others, it would be the most confusing game I ever played, and I wouldn't understand any of the mechanics. Because see, if you play the other game, they introduce these mechanics one by one, like United Front just shows up in this game, but the other things you're doing have showed up in previous games. So they lead you along and give you new battle systems. Now, but I also understand from some reading, the battle system in the Calvert games is going to be all new. And they've also changed the game engine. So hopefully it'll be even higher quality. The gameplay will be even more fun. I can't wait for those games. But if you've played Trail of Cold Steel, you should have already bought this. I don't know what you're waiting for. Waiting for it to go on sale? Again, it's on Switch. It's everywhere. You can get it anywhere. Go get it. Have fun. I'm sure I could have found a lot more to say about that, but that's the most I could organize my chaotic thoughts. And by the way, now I got to get back to my third playthrough because I still haven't found that enemy I need to scan. So thanks for stopping by. See you next time. Bye-bye. I'm still waving.